Good evening. Today we are going to begin a new topic that is we'll just geomorphology. Okay, and we will complete a bit of yesterday's topic, which is the Brahmaputra River. So this has been mostly in the current affairs for many reasons in the last 1 or 2 years. As I told you earlier, because of the Chinese wanting to uh, build a dam, and not only Chinese but even the northeastern states, they are also wanting permission to build dams in this region. So it's been in the news on and off. So I thought it's better we study about it. And then we move on to the actual topics of geomorphology, which is the structure of the earth first, followed by plate tectonics, and with reference to plate tectonics, the types of plates and so on. And then we'll go on to doing landform development. So first, let us just look at the river Brahmaputra. So as you can see, it is a river that flows right across the central parts of Assam, and it just the tributaries are found from the surrounding region. Okay, so you have many more, most of the tributaries coming from the Himalayan region. Okay, so you have lots of tributaries coming from the Himalayan region, and from the plateau region is where you have the other tributaries coming in. So the if you see the extreme corner there, you have a river called Dihang. So the Dihang meets up with another river called as Lohit. Initially, the Dihang flows north or northeast, and then it goes south, and then turns southwest, and then it meets up with Lohit, and then together, then from that point onwards, it is called as the Brahmaputra. So the source of the Brahmaputra is Chemyungdang Glacier in Kailash Range. Kailash Range near Mansarovar Lake, and it passes through Mansarovar Lake. So it's in very close to the source of the Indus and the Satluj rivers. Okay, so this Kailash mountain again has been coming in the news frequently, and especially with problems with China. This year, they almost did not give permission for Indians to visit Kailash mountain. So Kailash mountain is famous for its glacier. It's actually a glacier, or it's called as the Shivalingam in the form of ice. Okay, and it's found in a cave in the Kailash mountain. So every year pilgrims go. They get permission. They have to get permission to go and cross over into China in order. Of course, that is now a Tibetan region, but now it is China, to visit that particular temple, right? So that's your glacier. So from there, it initially flows east for a long distance of 1,200 kilometers in what is a very dry and flat region, right, of southern Tibet. Uh, though it is dry, the river still gets water because its source is in a glacier. So in summer, you will find that the glacier melts a bit and gives it some water. But in winter, there is not that much of water in the river. Okay. Here it is called as the Sangpo, which means as the purifier in the Tibetan language. And then it enters India as a turbulent, dynamic river through a deep gorge in the eastern Himalayas near Namcha Barwa. I showed you picture of a gorge, right? So it makes a turn there just south of Namcha Barwa, and then it comes into India. And actually it has cut that gorge. So that means this is what we call as a river that was existing before the formation of the Himalayas, right? So on the other side, on the Tibetan plateau, as the entire plateau has been rising, then you will find that the initially there was a block, and then you have the formation of Mansarovar. Mansarovar Lake has been created because of the pushing up, some area has got blocked off, so the water has not been able to move directly south, and therefore it has sort of got distributed in different directions, right? So we have outflows from this river, starting of course from Kailash range and into the river, and then outflows from this river. and then it has speeded up because the height of the region in the east is much more, and so it is speeded up and then formed that deep gorge, okay, around Namcha Barwa. So at that point of time, the name of the river changes from Sangpo to Siang or Dihang. Siang is a Chinese name, Dihang is the Arunachal Pradesh name, okay, or Assam name, or generally the Indian side, the tribal name. Now it enters into India completely in the near the town of Sadia, which is in Arunachal Pradesh, okay, west of Sadia. That is the portion from which actually entering into India. And the Chinese are actually claiming one part of that area as being part of China only because they want to build a dam there. So you must remember, when you build a dam, you need a mountainous area, okay, with two hills, especially with two hills and surrounded by other hills, so that water can be stored. Otherwise it's very difficult to build it. It's basically a wall, and then if you block a river, especially a river like Brahmaputra, then the river will go around the dam and flow off. So it needs to be between two highlands, generally a hill, and that's where this Chinese people want to build the dam. But at this point of time, there is not much water in the river. Okay. So initially it flows southwest, and then it receives what is called as its main left bank tributary, that is Dibang or Sikang and Lohit, right? And after that, it is then known as the Brahmaputra. Okay. So these three rivers actually join up together and then make the actual Brahmaputra. So the Brahmaputra then travels another distance of 750 kilometers along the Assam Valley, and the other left bank tributary. So left bank meaning now you are facing west. So the river is flowing from east to west. So left bank is the tributaries that are coming from the Meghalaya plateau and from all those hills in the surrounding region. I have not connected the disconnecting the right. So here is where we have the names of the tributaries. The important tributaries are Burhi, Dihing, and Dhansari. Okay, coming from the left bank, meaning to say the hills in the south. Then we have another important, yes, another important right bank tributary. One second. Right, which is Subanasri, Kameng, Manas, and Sankosh, of which I think Manas will be familiar to you because Manas is where we have the uh, biosphere reserve. Okay, it is a huge national heritage for us because it has the famous rhinos, one-horned rhinoceros in this region, right? Manas and Kaziranga are the two famous uh, uh, the wildlife reserves in this. It's actually called as a biosphere reserve now, right? So Subansiri, then Kameng, Manas, and Sankosh come from the right bank, and the right bank is what is coming from the Himalayan region, right? Subanashri also has its origin in Tibet, right, as an antecedent river. Now, I've not used the term antecedent. We use the term antecedent if a river has existed before the surrounding region has changed. So, if I say all the, I mean, if I list the antecedent rivers, they are Indus, Satluj, Sangpo, and Subanashri also in coming through one of the valleys in between the eastern Himalayas, right? Similar to Kosi. Kosi also is antecedent, existed before the formation of the Himalayas, may have just changed direction a bit, okay, and then flowed into India. So that's the Subanashri as one extra river. Okay. Then it enters into Bangladesh near a place called Dhubri and then flows southward. Here in Bangladesh, the Tista River joins it again on the right bank. So Tista is a river that actually goes through most of Sikkim. It has its source in Sikkim in the Kanchenjunga range, and then from there you will find it flows across Sikkim and then crosses the plains of the West Bengal, right? But to the east of River Kosi, and then later on it joins up with it goes through. It doesn't go through the actual Rar region, but it moves more to the east and then joins up with the Brahmaputra. Now, at this point, the river changes its name. So, in Bangladesh, it is called now as the Jamuna. Okay, so up to that point, it's called as Brahmaputra. Then, after the Tista joins it, it is known as the Jamuna. Finally, it meets up with Padma. Now, what is Padma? Padma is the Bhagirathi of the Ganga. So, when the river divides itself near Patna, you will find that we have Hooghly and Bhagirathi. When Bhagirathi enters into Bangladesh, again the name is changed and then it becomes Padma. Then Padma joins up with the Yamuna or Jamuna, and then it falls into the Bay of Bengal. So these are the names of the rivers in Bangladesh. Okay. Now, this river is obviously known for its floods and it has large islands full of rich, fertile soil, right? And we know how agriculture is very important. So, here, this is one of the islands. This is also Majuli Island, which is more cultivated. The houses and all are interior, okay? And on the outside here, it is cultivated. So, this just shows that the Brahmaputra river is actually bringing lots of material, right? And these islands now, most of these islands, what happens to it is that it becomes completely flooded out in the rainy season. So just before the rains, all these people have to pack up and go away. They can't build any permanent houses here. They just have only, like, a shed that they live in, and then you will find that they pack up their houses and move to the mainland. Generally they go to Guwahati so that they can find some other job, and only after the rains stop and the river the level of the river comes down, then they come back, and then they just occupy whichever island they get, if they can remember, because the islands will get disturbed. So these islands are not really permanent, but as the river is settling down, it just deposits all its material. Now, this kind of a pattern is called as a braided stream or a braided river. It looks like, a plait of your hair, how you plait it. It looks like that. So it is called as a braided stream, and the islands in between are called as interflows. Now, in this case, it is similar to the Dove region. The only difference is that in the Doab region, there are only two rivers in between which you have the islands. In this case, the river has divided itself into several. I mean, it's not even countable sometimes, right? So here itself, you can see one, two, three, four, five or six divisions of the river. So joining up and separating, joining up and separating, and there are many such divisions. So the word doab is not used here. The doab is only used for interflows or islands in between two rivers. Okay, so and that's mainly in the western part of India or northwestern part of India. So here is another one. You can see how the river is turning zigzag this way and that way, and all the green that you are seeing here is starts off from the end of the monsoon in the month of September, October, and goes up till March, April, May. So this is all cultivated lands, and you have the vegetation springs up in this region. There is natural vegetation, but most of the region has actually been cultivated. And this is the richest soil. They never need to add any fertilizer, because whenever you have a flood, new soil comes in, and the new soil is rich in minerals, and therefore you will find they are able to cultivate here without any problem. So mostly the most important crop that is grown here is your rice, because rice is a crop that grows quickly, and you can have two crops of rice before the river floods again. Okay. Right. So these are the important places along the river Brahmaputra. You have Pasighat, you have Dibrugarh, you have Nimati, Tejpur, and Guwahati. Okay. So these are the places as you go from up the northern parts of the river and to the south, right, or whichever way. These questions have come in previous papers, so I've just put a slide. But nowadays there aren't any such questions, but just for general knowledge, right? So that's your river Brahmaputra, and that corner that we see north of Pasighat is where the river moves like a bend. That is your Namcha Barwa, okay? And that is initially the Dihang, and then you have Lohit coming in to meet up on the side, and then it is called as the Brahmaputra. But in the north, they've shown there as Brahmaputra, that is the Sangpo River. Okay, so the river keeps on, the names of the river of Brahmaputra keeps changing, right? Sangpo in the Tibet region, Tibet China region, then it becomes Dihang or Sikang in the Arunachal Pradesh region. After it meets Rohit, it becomes Brahmaputra. When it enters Bangladesh, it becomes Jamuna. When it meets with the Ganga river, then it is called as the Padma. So we have various names for this river, okay, and as it along the coast. Right. Next, we move on to geomorphology. So under geomorphology, first we are going to study the structure of the earth or the layers of the earth. So this diagram gives you an approximate cross section of the earth structure. And you would have studied this in school. And in school, you would have been told that you have 4 layers, right? But actually, there are just 3 layers, and each layer is divided into 2 depending on its characteristic features and properties, right? And these 3 layers are broadly the crust, then you have the mantle, and then you have the core. Okay, so as you can see here, the crust is divided into 2 parts. You can see the dark gray and the light gray, right? Then below the crust you have the mantle, again divided into 2 parts, which is the orange, the dark orange and light orange. And then of course you have a lower mantle, but that actually is contiguous with the main mantle. And then below that you have a liquid, which is the outer core, and finally you have the inner core. So each zone here is actually divided into each layer is further divided into 2 parts. So let's begin with the first layer. So the 3 layers, as I told you, the crust is the one we live on. Okay, the mantle is below the crust, right, and it is in a liquid state because it is very hot. And finally you have the core in the center, which is even hotter and even higher pressures. So there are actually information with reference to densities and all that, but that's available in any book, and it's not very significant. Obviously the crust has the least density, and the density increases as you go from the crust to the core, right? So how do you think these layers came into being? So in the beginning, the earth was only gas, right? And it was supposed to be pulled off from the sun in what we call as the Big Bang theory. So a part of the sun exploded, or the universe exploded, even the sun also supposed to have exploded. And a part of the sun then, after exploding, many pieces flew out. Some flew very far, some flew closer. And then as they flow out, they are smaller pieces. So therefore, they sort of joined up together. Many in one particular orbit, many pieces joined up together through what is we call as coalescence, and then became one solid planet, right? And so therefore, if you take the composition of the earth, whatever we find on the earth is mainly a part of what we find on the sun. So the sun has all these minerals that we have here on the earth, and that's why the earth is made up of so many minerals. Now, obviously, some of the minerals are very light, okay, and some minerals are very heavy. So the as the cooling started to take place, because the you know that the sun is hot because of nuclear fissioning and fusioning. So that sort of became less, and that is how the earth and all the other planets began to cool down. So the earth is much smaller and therefore cool down a bit faster than the other planets like Jupiter, Saturn. They are still cooling down, right? Though the surface is cold because they are far away from the sun, they are still in the gas state. So here is where you'll find that as it cooled down, the lighter material stayed on top and the heavier material was found below, right? And therefore you'll find that the density also varies that way. So we find that the outer layer must have cooled very quickly, right? Whereas the inner one, especially the core, is still extremely hot. And in between, we have the mantle, which is in between hot, right? So we can say that what has happened here is that the Earth today, after 4.3 billion years, that's the age of the Earth, the outer surface is solid, both the crust and both the layers of the crust. Then the mantle is in the form of a liquid, and even the core, the outer core is liquid, but the inner core has become solid. Now, though we have very high temperatures in the inner core has become solid mainly because of gravity. Okay, so that's the general information of how these three have come into being. So, like I said, each of these is further divided depending on into two parts each based on their properties. So let's look at the crust. Now the crust here is very, very thin, right? I also give the example of a boiled egg. If you boil an egg, then the shell of the egg is there is a thin skin in between the shell and the white, right? That makes up the crust. So the shell is thicker than what is underneath. Underneath it will be a thin skin-like thing, right, of an egg, and that is both together made of the crust, right? So that's why they say it's a skin of an apple. You can liken it to that. So it's very thin in comparison to the other layers. So why is it so thin? Is because the minerals that have come up are only that much. Okay, and initially the mineral, the rocks and all are all igneous rocks, and much later we have an addition of other rocks to it. Okay, so what is the thickness? The thickness is about 70 kilometers under the continents. So starting from zero going down, the continents are what we call as 70 kilometers, the continental surface. And then we have, it's called as the Ciel. So here is where we have silica and aluminum. Now, silica is a mineral that is found right across the earth structure, right up to the mantle. It's only in the core that the minerals change completely. So silica is found everywhere. Okay, and silica is nothing but sand. And we use the first two letters of silica Si and first two letters of aluminum to create what we call as the Cl. So here is where the crust broke up into two parts, right? Or rather settled down into two parts. The lighter parts come floating up and becoming the continental crust region. And like I said, this is made up mainly of an igneous rock called granite. Okay, so granite is actually has a combination of Cl, of silica, it has aluminum, and it has other minerals in it also. Now, it is only the same crust is only about 10 to 30 kilometers under the ocean, and it is then called as the oceanic crust, made up of silica and magnesium, so SiMa, and that's why it's called as SiMa. right? So if you take a look at the map of the world, then you can see all this. Now this is made up of basalt. Now basalt is also an igneous rock. What is the difference between granite and basalt? Granite is a mineral that has been created when magma cools down under very, very slowly. Okay, so when the magma cools down very slowly, it forms into crystals, right? It has time to form into crystals, the minerals, and that is why it's called as granite. So you can make out, if you look at it itself, you can make out it will be light in color, and you can see the different minerals. You can see the crystals of various minerals in granite, right? Whereas the Sima is only made up of basalt. So this basalt is heavier than granite, and it is not as if we do not have basalt on the earth's surface, right? We have basalt on the earth's surface wherever we have volcanic outflows. Okay, so all yesterday we saw the Peninsula Plateau, North Deccan Plateau region. That region is actually made up more of basalt. So compared to granite, basalt is heavier. It is also dark in color, right? And because it is created from the cooling of lava, granite is created from the cooling of magma, and basalt is created from the cooling of lava. So when lava flows out on the surface, it cools very fast. And that is one of the reasons that the basalt in the oceans, right, are actually very extensive when compared to the granite. And therefore it cooled, and it has a different density, and so it will stay down, right? And it cooled down there to form the Sima. So that's how the Sial and the Sima were created, right? So both these are igneous rock. I will be dealing with this in a later class. So that's what the crust, how it looks like. So the continental plate is all one uneven form. It has many shapes. Mostly it is plateau and plain. Mountains came in later. Okay, mountains also come in. Yes, after a weathering or after a folding, faulting, and so on and so forth. Right, and the oceanic plate, as you can see, is like that. So under the continent, the oceanic plate is actually pushed down, right? And it is, they are able, it was able to be down like that only because the red that you see here is the upper mantle, which is actually at very high temperatures in an almost liquid state. Okay, so that's basically your continental plate, right, which is Sial on top, and you have Sima below. Okay, let's look at the mantle now. Now, the mantle is the largest layer of the earth. To understand this, again, look at the boiled egg. So, when you're breaking open the egg, what do you actually see, which is makes most of the egg, is the white, right? And the yellow is a small thing inside. So that yellow is can be compared to the core, and what is white is your mantle. So since the earth is a spherical body, right, and the entire mantle just covers it in all directions, that is why it has so much of material in it. Okay, now the upper mantle is extremely hot and dense, and actually flows, like because of the heavy weight of the continents, it actually flows under the crust. And that is what is called as the asthenosphere. So the red patch you saw there is actually the asthenosphere. It lies just below the Sima or the oceanic crust. It has a temperature of 1200 degrees Celsius. Its density, of course, is more than the Sima, right? Sial is the least and Sima is the most. And below this is the lower mantle. So the mantle is divided into two, the upper mantle and the lower mantle. Some geologists believe that there is a middle mantle and a lower mantle, but there is no defining characteristic as to what difference there are, okay, between these two. Okay, now this lower mantle is the reason why we are having the crustal plates moving. Okay, and that movement actually is transferred into the asthenosphere. So what are the temperatures of the lower mantle? It goes up from, starts up from about 1200 degrees and goes up to close to 2000 odd, 1500 degrees. Okay, and even more near the core. So as you go deeper, the temperature of the magma in the mantle increases. This mantle is made up of mixed metals and silicates, right? So if we find a concentration of iron ore in some of our rocks, it is because the iron from the mantle has come up through volcanic eruptions or volcanic outflows, and that's why we have iron concentrated in some parts of the older rocks in the world. So we know that the Indian Peninsula Plateau is very old, but we don't find iron everywhere. We do have various grades of iron everywhere, iron ore, but the most concentrations are the northeastern side and the and your southeastern region, which is Karnataka, Goa, and Maharashtra. But everywhere else, you'll find the iron is a less content. And therefore, iron is also one substance that is more common next to silica on the Earth's surface. Okay, right. So this is the asthenosphere. You have the continental crust and the oceanic crust. Then you have the mantle, rigid mantle. Now that rigid mantle is in the liquid state but is not moving unless the mantle below moves. So you got the term there called convecting mantle. So what do you mean by that? In the mantle, there are movements which are circular in nature, and therefore it is called as a convection current. So how is this happening? Here, the lower part of the magma, which is near the core. Now, the core is still in a sort of nuclear mode where you have fissioning and fusioning. So, a lot of heat is generated, and this heat is radiated into the lower mantle. Now, we know that if anything becomes hot, it tends to rise up. So here is where the hot magma starts to move upwards. Now, how thick is the mantle? I didn't tell you that. The mantle is 2,900 kilometers thick. Okay. And the crust is only 70 kilometers. 70 plus your 30, an average of 100 kilometers. But the magma mantle is the, 2,900 kilometers, of which the asthenosphere is about 400 kilometers. Okay. So the rest of the 2,500 kilometers is the magma mantle. Now, from the bottom of this mantle, because of the radiating heat from the center, from especially from the outer core, you will find that the hot magma begins to rise. Now, we are looking at something that is very, very big. And therefore, in any one part, and the heat is not evenly distributed. So, any one part, you can find that the magma has begun to rise. Now, as the magma rises, what is going to happen? It is going to cool because it is rising away from the source of the heat. And it is rising up to 2,900 kilometers, inclusive of the asthenosphere. So, obviously, it is going to cool down quite a bit. Now, this is a thick substance. It is magma. Magma means liquid rock, okay, or a molten rock. We use the word molten. It's not really liquid because of gravity. The moment the pressures are released, it turns into liquid, and that's how the volcanic lava flows out. So it is actually a little more solid, and we call the word molten. So when this is rises up to 2,900 kilometers from the source of the heat, obviously it is going to cool. Now, as it rises up, it reaches the lower portion of the either the Sial or the Sima, right? And at this point, sometimes it may come up and blow out as a volcano and then form a volcanic island. But many times because if the crust is thicker, then it will go under the crust. So as it rises up, while it is going under the crust, you will find that it will push the crust, and that will cause the uh, crust to move, right? And that is how we have this plate movement. So this is called convection, because when it cools wherever possible, it is going to sink down. And when it sinks down, again it will become hot, again it will rise. And this circular process is what is called as a convection current. And as it rises and turns under the crust, it causes the crust to break up into plates, which is called as the lithospheric plates. So I'm introducing one more term here as the lithospheric plate, right? So let's look at, so let's look at this diagram that shows you how we have the convectional currents happening in the mantle. Remember, this is only a cross section, and convection currents do not happen everywhere. But today we know exactly where it is happening. For example, we know that India has moved north. That means 100% there is a convection current below India. And it has pushed India right from the southern parts of Africa right up to the in the northern hemisphere, and pushed us towards the Asian plate, right? And that is how big the current is. Similarly, if you see Australia, which moved east, then we know that yes, we have a convection current that has pushed Australia and pushed it that way. Similarly, we have North and South America. They have moved west. It means under each, right, there is a very big convection current that has pushed the region. Okay. Europe has not been pushed much. Europe has been pushed only partially, because then it has come into contact with the Asian region and it has stopped. But the movement is still happening with North America and South America. And India also, it keeps happening, which is why we keep having earthquakes more in the northern part, right? Southern region rarely has any earthquake. Most of the earthquakes are all found in the north. And the reason is because of this convection current that is moving inside below us several 100 kilometers, right? And it has moved sideways already, and it has not found a spot where it can sink. So this can be, uh, I mean, the best example I can give you, something I've already been talking about, is the low pressure, air from the low pressure rising up, right? Moving sideways, we call that advection, and then coming down. So in this case, if the movement is continuing to happen, that means the magma has not come down. It is still cold, it is still being pushed. And remember, why is it continuously being pushed? Because the hot magma from below is continuing to rise. Okay, so that is how you'll find that you have these convection currents. So I'll take you now to, so here is the explanation that you can go to the kitchen and do. So when you're heating anything like soup, water, or even milk, you can actually watch convection currents, right, by doing an experiment. You will find that they will you can see, if you can use color, you can actually see this better, right? So what is happening here is that the bottom level of the liquid becomes hot, and therefore when anything becomes hot, it rises up. Now as it rises up, it displaces the cold water or milk, and the cold milk comes down. So if you put a cork in the center of the vessel, right, you will find that after some time it will move to the side. Okay, so hot water rises up and then pushes the cold water down, and that becomes hot and that rises up. And then boiling will take place once the temperature of the whole liquid is the same. So you'll have the bubbling and boiling take place when the entire liquid has the same temperature. But this movement that we have is a very small movement here in our vessel. When we look at the whole earth, I mean, it's so huge, then you'll find that in this case, you have a very strong movement, right? And a very sustainable movement, so that the continents are continuing to move. Okay, so let's look at the lithosphere. Now, the lithosphere here is made about, the term lithosphere is given to the entire crust, which is Sima, Sial, and the upper layer of the mantle, which is asthenosphere. So, Sial, Sima plus asthenosphere together is basically being affected by this convectional current, right? And that is called as a lithosphere. So, it seems to be rigid, okay, and brittle. So it seems to, because it is moving, it is having that force from below, and that is what is called as a lithosphere. So all these three actually act almost like a single piece, but in some places you will find that the it's only made up mainly of continent, and in some places it is mainly made up of ocean crust. Okay, so the whole earth today is actually broken into what we call as lithospheric plates, right? And they can be continental, that means only continental, but with little bit of the Sima below it and the asthenosphere being there, or it can be only oceanic, right? Or both. And the movement of these plates is called as plate tectonics. So tectonics just mean movement, right? The movement, basically sideways movement, right? And that is your tecton. So here is where you have the lithospheric plates of the world. So if you see the color combination here, now let us look at the yellow, the yellow here. Now the yellow here is the Pacific plate, which is one single large plate, and that is an oceanic plate. You have another light blue there. The light blue again is an oceanic plate. Okay, and then you have a darker blue, which is the Antarctic plate. So where you have a color which is light and dark, like for example, North America. North America is what do we say, a peach color, and then you have a darker shade in the ocean. Same way with South America. South America is a violet sort of purple, and you have a dark purple in the Atlantic Ocean. So between Africa and South America and Europe and North America, we have the Atlantic Ocean. And you have different colors there. So here is where we have a combination of both, right? So when it is a light color and a dark color, then it is a combination of both continental. So South America by itself is a continental plate, and continues in the Atlantic Ocean, and it is called as the entire one piece is called as the South American plate. So it's both continent as well as oceanic. The same way with Africa, you have a light color surrounded by the dark color. Okay, so surrounding Africa is an ocean. It is the Atlantic Ocean on the west, and it is the Southern Ocean in the south, and the Indian Ocean in the east, right? And therefore, this dark colors is actually connected to Africa and forms the African plate. So if you can imagine now what's happening below, right? And the dark line that you see dividing the South American plate and African plate is actually a huge mountain range that we have in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, running in the form of the same shape as the ocean, almost in an S shape, okay, about 12,000 kilometers from north to south. It is a continuous fault. We call it as a fault, as a top of a volcanic mountain region under the sea. And it has come up, if you go further up north, you can see Iceland. That's where the magma has actually come up outside to form what we call as Iceland. So Iceland has been created like that. Okay, so similarly you have Europe. Europe is a light green and the sea around it is dark green. So that means it is made up of two plates, both continent and ocean. So we only have probably two only oceanic plates. One is the Pacific plate, and the second is the Antarctic plate. Of course, Antarctica is a continent, so yeah, that's why it's a light blue and dark blue. So the dark colors are the ocean. So we only have one oceanic plate, one huge oceanic plate, and that is the Pacific plate. Okay, the Nazca plate is also an oceanic one, but it is very, very small, right? So you can imagine the whole of the Pacific plate moving as one piece underneath. There are several cracks on the ocean floor. When I do a bit of oceanography, we'll study that also, right? So you can see that the entire world is divided into plates like this. Europe and Asia today have become one plate. Previously, it was two different plates. Europe has actually moved from the southern part, western part, eastern part of Africa, western part of Africa. It has actually moved from there and moved north. And how do we know this? Now, is this all a story, or is this all like, we just putting two together, two and two together and making four? Is it a coincidence? Yes, people in the past thought like it is like, must be like that only, right? But now we have scientific proof about it, which I'll explain later, right? So that's your lithospheric plate. Let's move on to the last division. The last division here is called the core, and it is like a huge ball of very hot metals. Now, this is further divided into two parts, the outer core and the inner core. The outer core is very hot, and it is like doesn't have so much of the weight because the mantle region is in again a molten stage, so the weight will be slightly less, and therefore the outer core is in the form of a liquid, right? And it used to be called barysphere earlier. So today we find it has nickel, iron, and sulfides in this region, sulfides of iron and nickel, and separately nickel and iron. And these are extremely dense, right? And they have a high temperature of almost 3,000 degrees Celsius, right? So that's what it looks like. It has a height, depth of about 3,000 kilometers. Yes, 3,000 kilometers. Okay. 3,400, yeah, is the, no, sorry, entire core is 3,400. This is halfway, about 1,700 meters, right? Kilometers. So about 1,400 miles here. It says here liquid iron and nickel, but there are also, you also have uh, sulfides here. They have discovered it recently. The inner core here has very high temperatures. The temperatures here reach to about 4,000 to 6,000 degrees Celsius. And since it is surrounded by so many layers, the pressures here are extremely high. Okay. And therefore, all the minerals are squeezed together and they are not able to move about like a liquid, right? And the minerals it behaves like a solid. Okay, it also vibrates like a solid, and therefore it is made up mainly of nickel and iron, and therefore it is called as knife. Okay, so we have Cl, Sema, and knife based on the minerals found in the region, right? And that inner core, like I said, it has a temperature of around the surface temperature of the sun, which is 6,000 degrees Celsius. Okay, so that's what it looks like, the inner core, concentrated. Now, very briefly, I'm sure you have a question. So how do people know this, right? How do people know this? How do scientists know this? The scientists were, first and foremost, they thought that the earth's surface was just like the same everywhere, right? But from the study of earthquake waves, they have realized that when an earthquake is created, so an earthquake is what we feel on the earth's surface, right? So that is where then they have created an instrument known as a seismogram, and that records the earthquake waves. Now they are able to get, when an earthquake occurs in one place, they seem to be radiating the movement or the vibration or the earthquake waves or seismic waves seem to be moving in all directions right across the earth. So therefore, they have uh, put a whole, all these places, many places have got seismographs. And then when they get the record, all the data is compiled. And then they discovered that there are actually two types, main two types of earthquake waves. We call them as body waves and surface waves. So we are looking at body waves. Body waves again are two types. One is called as a primary wave and the second is called as a secondary wave. Now I'm going to do this separately as a topic, but I just want you to give an idea. You should know that all this, whatever we're talking about, is something that scientists, many types of scientists have sat together, compile the data and come through this. So this primary wave basically moves in straight lines. But depending on the material, the consistency of the material, the density of the material, the primary wave turns to have, it shifts in its wave as it's going from the surface on top to across the earth, entire earth, and out on the other surface, on the opposite direction, right? So here is where they notice that the primary wave is goes through all the layers but is deflected and refracted and therefore finally arrives at a particular point. But the secondary wave is not shown at all on the opposite side. And the only reason is that the secondary wave is, which is what is called as a transverse, we move sideways. When it reaches the outer core, it is absorbed in that liquid and therefore does not transmit further to the inner core. And therefore, it doesn't transmit to the inner core, it will not come out in the opposite direction. Correct? So that is how, by studying earthquake waves, we have been able to figure out what is the what are the contents of this earth of ours. And it is changing all the time. Like I remember when we were in school, they said that the inner earth is liquid and the outer core is solid. But now with development and all, they say, so then it is possible that the because of a release in pressure, sometimes when there are huge volcanic eruptions, then there is some release in pressure and the entire thing becomes liquid, but just for a short time. Okay, and then because of the gravity of the earth, everything goes back together and becomes a solid, right? So that's what's been happening, and that's how we know that we have that's how we know what's happening in each layer. But there are very few students who take these subjects. The subject is geology, right? Very few people who take the subject one. There are very few colleges in India that offer geology. Geography and geology are the two subjects are not even offered except at the university level. And the number of students who actually go to study all this is very, very less, right? So that is why it's taking a long time for people to. But in America, in Europe, a lot of people are there who are become volcanologists, seismologists, geologists, petrologists, and so on and so forth. So there are many, many specializations that you have here, right? And so therefore, if I mean, we need to get more information, then we need to look at how uh, I mean, need to look at how our syllabus changes, right? And we hope for better these things next time, right, in the future. Okay, so this is the structure of the earth. Okay, right, it's not moving. Yeah, my computer is slowing down. Okay, so next we move on to is I close the share. Let me just open it again. Of plate tectonics. Okay. So if you look at plate tectonics today, then we understand now that it is because of the structure of the earth that we have a whole lot of uh, understanding about what is happening on the surface of the earth, right? And what I'm going to tell you now is about how plate tectonics is happening, and also give you the reasons. So remember, it's all the scientific reasons that we need to look at with reference to plate tectonics. Okay, not opening. Right. So the first, the before plate tectonics came into being, we had what we call as a theory of continental drifting. And this continental drifting basically was found by some geographers and also
Ma'am,
by some people. Can you hear me?
ma'am, I think your screen is not
Yes, my
shared. I
screen.
think
Yeah,
so.
my PowerPoint just closed, so I'm going to
Okay.
start it. Okay. Why is my Zoom not opening out? I'm not getting the bar for that. Are you able to see now?
No, ma'am.
Not yet.
Yes.
Yeah, I know, but it doesn't matter. I've already put it on full screen. Yeah, I got it. Okay, so we move on to the theory of plate tectonics. So this is going to explain to you the scientific proof, right? So today, continental drift is no longer considered. So I'll just very briefly tell you about continental drift. Continental drift is about uh, my video is on. So continental drift is mainly that geographers and scientists realize that continents are moving because the distance between the continents was increasing, especially between Europe and North America, right? And they thought that all the continents are just moving just like that, like a boat moving on a surface, right? But then you'll find that in the Second World War made a whole lot of drastic changes in the way scientists saw the Earth. Like I told you in the atmosphere, how they found the jet stream. Similarly, the Second World War also had the development of submarines. So these submarines that belonged to various countries would go and shoot at ships. So different ships were like attacked. So they would shoot at the ship, and they had to move away from the region as soon as possible. In doing so, in the Atlantic Ocean, okay, when they were running away from, after shooting a ship, after sending a missile to the ship, because otherwise they can't stay in the same water, right? They realized, they suddenly found that the sea floor was not flat. They suddenly saw rising mountains on the sea floor, and then they had to immediately start to come up, otherwise they would have crashed into that, right? So they had to stop and immediately come up, and then they took pictures. Fortunately, they had what we call as the sonar machines in those days. They took the pictures of this and collected a whole lot of information, and then they sent it back to their various countries, and then many people then began to study the ocean floor. So today the ocean floor is a completely, there's a map of the ocean floor that looks like very complicated, and especially in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, you have an entire mountain range that they have discovered. So therefore, in the evidence here, like I said, Wegener original description, he just connected the map of the world, and then he found that the continents or the coastlines or the shorelines seem to be fitting together like a jigsaw puzzle, right? So here is where I have that jigsaw puzzle. Push everything till it fits somewhere, and yes, jigsaw puzzle. But a jigsaw puzzle is not a scientific evidence, right? It could just be coincidence. And therefore, we need to look for further things, right? So, if the continents were once together, they should be similar rocks, right? So if I have a piece of cake, if I have cake and I make it of different materials, like I have vanilla, I have chocolate, I have pista, right? But I've not stirred it all up. I just put in the different flavors and colors and I bake that cake. I don't stir it up. I just put in the colors. When the cake is formed, then you will, some people will find the vanilla, some people will find the chocolate, which will be brown, vanilla will be white, like that. Strawberry will be pink, right? So those pieces will stick together. So therefore, they first thing they did, the scientists did, was to look for similar rocks. So here is where, from point A in North South America, they found that the rocks of A were very similar to point B in Africa. Okay, so therefore, now they are several thousand kilometers apart, right? So today, while doing the structure, that is Brazil. Actually, the A point is Brazil, and Brazil is the same rocks that we have in India. Okay, and the same rocks that are found in B are also the same. So that's what they, that was the first scientific this thing. Again, we are making two and two together, and we may think, okay, the magma just cooled and maybe they had the same structure of the rocks and so on and so forth. They needed more evidence, right? But then they considered that rocks are like fingerprints. So the mineral content, the structure can often be unique. Yet, because we are such a large earth, this was not the only scientific evidence that we were looking for. So this continental drift was created by a person called Wegener, right? And he was able to correlate rocks from different shores to say that yes, they were once together. So that is the second piece of evidence. The first one was just the map, which is the jigsaw fit uh, puzzle, right? Then, if you see the rocks, now some rocks may have fossils in them. So igneous rocks don't have fossils in them. So it's very difficult for you to say, okay, they were together. But sedimentary rocks that had fossils in them, right, which are not found anywhere else, that was a third evidence, right, to show that the two areas were formed in the same climatic zone and same types of animals lived there. Okay, so here is where again in A and B, in some part of the region where sedimentary rocks were formed, you did find that there were some fossils living in specific places. Now, when you're choosing the type of fossil, you cannot choose a fossil that is found all over. Of course, fossils will not be found of the same type, will not be found all over, because each animal has its own habitat, and each habitat is created with reference to the same type of temperature and rainfall. So A is the Amazon region, B is the Congo forest. But there is a lot of difference in the kind of animals and habitat people that you find in A. You find the anaconda in A, whereas in B you don't have an anaconda, right? So we needed to have more specific, uh, what we call as evidence, right? So here again, this is a very limited range, but then it is still a proof. Like for example, today they have found there was a fossil in the southern part of the peninsula region, which was only found in South America. So unless these two areas were joined together and those animals lived there together, right, and then were separated, or they died there, got buried, and then got separated, whenever it happened, right, then only we can say, yes, it's possible that we have this, right? That fossils can be considered as a third reason why, of evidence that all the continents were joined up, right? So correlating fossils from opposite shores. Then the fourth evidence now. So here is where we have what we call as sea floor spreading. Now, what do we mean by sea floor spreading is that the size of the sea floor is increasing. Okay. So if the continents were first joined together and then they started to move apart, then the sea between them must be getting wider. This is called as sea floor spreading. So how do we know that this is true? So first, in the middle of the oceans, we have seen that we have underwater mountains found throughout the world in every ocean, especially Indian Ocean and your Atlantic Ocean. Pacific Ocean does not have mid-ocean ridges, but we also have a ocean ridge in the Southern Ocean. Southern Ocean has been created as from 60 degrees south, right? That region is called as the Southern Ocean, also called as the Antarctic Ocean. Okay, as it is a combination of the three oceans in this region. That is the Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, and Indian Ocean. So it was the Southern Ocean was created mainly because of legal problems when people started to or countries started to move into Antarctica. Then there were certain laws that needed to be followed, certain things that happened, and nobody knew who will solve those problems. So they needed a legal condition, and therefore they created or something. It was created then, right? So Southern Ocean created recently only after Antarctica got settled by many. So that's in the middle of that region, in between the continents, right, and Antarctica. So I have the continents of South Africa or Africa, South America, and Australia and New Zealand. South of this region, there is a mountain range that is running throughout the world, parallel to Antarctica. Okay, so that's where we have. So you can see here, you can see the ridge. There's a brownish patch in the center of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, then if you go further south, south of Africa, you can see another range running east-west. Then that's there in the Indian Ocean, you have another one. That's the edge of the region between the African plate and the Indo-Australian plate. Okay, so here is where these mid-oceanic ridges. Now, what was the reason for getting this mid-oceanic ridges? Is because magma was rising up from below, right? And that was mainly basalt. Okay, so why was the magma rising up? So when the plate, this oceanic plate was separated, right, what we call as diverging away from each other, obviously the magma from the convectional current also was now easily able to come up. So it just flowed out. There was a crack in the ground and the entire thing flowed out. And when it flowed out, it did not erupt. Remember, there's a difference between eruption and flowing out. So I'm specifically using the word flowing out, and it is still happening. And therefore, as it flows out, it formed into these mountain ranges. Okay, so this is one continuous mountain range that we have right across, especially in the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean. Now, why didn't it happen in the Pacific Ocean? Is because as you saw the map of the lithospheric plate, the Pacific plate is one single plate, okay, and it is moving, right? And in the process of moving, it has cracked up a little bit from where magma has come out, but these have mainly come out in very small regions, and they have created the Hawaiian Islands. So Hawaiian Islands, you're in the middle of the ocean, it has been created only because lava has come out because of the crack, right? Oceanic plate is not very thick in these places, right? So magma coming out, and that's how the magma is coming out, right? So every time there is divergence, some more magma comes out, and then we have a new mountain range created. Okay, and this is happening uniformly right across the region. So you can imagine that below this you have rising magma from the convection current, and as it is coming, it is managed to break open the crust, which is the sema in this case, and then is flowing out. And the sema is basaltic, and so is this. So when lava comes out on the earth's surface, it is mainly basalt, because it is one, it will cool very quickly, right? It will be dark in color because it is from fire, cooling from fire. If cooling happens slowly, then it will form into crystals, and there are no crystals in this region, right? So here is where, as the new sea floor is added, it pushes the old floor apart, right? And that's your divergence that is happening. And that is the proof that we can look at if we look at the sea floor itself. So they studied the sea floor and realized that new material was being added, constantly being added. And we in geology we have something called carbon dating, also with not reference only with the fossils, but also we can find out the age of the rock itself by doing other tests. And they found that the new rocks were all in the middle of the ocean, and the old rocks were found on the edge. So as distance increased from the center of the ocean to the sides, right, so does the age of the rock. Okay, so here is where I have the mid-Atlantic ridge. So the dotted one that you can see is the present one, that is in the middle of the ocean. Then the black is your 10 million years ago. And then you have the small spots, which is 30 million, 40, 60, 100, and 160 million years ago. MYA is million years ago, right? So once upon a time, the continents were together, and as they started to separate, right, ranges started to form. Till today we have now this pattern of, so it is all getting pushed back. The whatever, say for example, what was 160 million years ago, what happened, that has been pushed away, that has been carried away by the magma. A new magma has come and it filled up the place gradually, and that's how we have sea floor spreading. Okay, so because the sea floor is spreading away from the center, the rocks which are equidistant but on opposite sides have the same age. Rock B has the same age as rock D. Similarly, the A has the same as E. Okay, so the age of the rocks is considered here, right? So this is one proof. So that now we know that the Atlantic Ocean recently created around 150 million years ago. When I say recent, 150 million years is like I think I told you, age of the Earth is 4.3 billion years. So in that 160 million years is almost like zero, like 5 minutes maybe through in that. Now the oldest rocks are found at the edge of the continents, and this is what is happening now. Now they also had one more proof. Yeah, this is the map of the Atlantic Ocean now. Previously, we just made a map and we put the ocean as a nice blue. In school, you know, you have colored continents and ocean and made it all same colors, right? But it is not at all that. It is so uneven. Okay, and that's on the right side. You can see those are the areas which were where the submarines have come and seen this huge mountain range, right? And have gone over it, taken pictures, and then gone back and collected all that evidence. And now you have a subject called oceanography, which actually studies these things in detail. Okay, right? So that's the new, and this is the old. So the near the continent, we have the old. So near North America, near South America, near Europe, and near Africa are all the old rocks, and all the new rocks are in the middle. In fact, if you go to Iceland, the center of this region is visible above sea level, and you can actually have people traveling into the region. Of course, they have spoiled this region environmentally, so they're not allowed anymore. Okay, and if you can scuba dive, you can or take some kind of a undersea equipment, and you can travel right across that and reach Antarctica, the Antarctica belt. Okay, the circumpolar ridge that we have, you can reach that. Okay, make a turn and maybe go up from Atlantic Ocean to Indian Ocean right along. If you can have undersea thing, maybe you can use a submarine, right, and you can travel right across this region like that. Now, what is the theory of sea floor spreading? It was proposed in 1960 by Harry Hess, right? And he said basaltic magma from the mantle is rising up to create the new ocean floor. So that is when the theory of the convection currents have come in. And it seems to be fitting. At the moment, it seems to be fitting. In future, we don't know whether it could change also, right? So on each side of the ridge, what do you mean by a ridge? A ridge is a long mountain. The top of the mountain is, you can walk in a straight line, right? So you see a mountain, like if you take your book and if you can invert it, make it stand, open the book and make it stand, that is a ridge. A mountain basically is conical. You'll have it shape of a cone. If I ask you to draw a mountain, you will draw like a triangle, like that, an inverted triangle. So, oh no, not inverted, actual triangle. That's how you draw it. The ridge will be like a quadrilateral. Take off the base, cut it out in half, right, and that would be a ridge. So this is a long ridge, right? And they so that's what we see, that the sea floor moves from the ridge and it goes towards the sides of the continents. Now, in the sides of the continents, they have discovered there are deep valleys created, right, through a process of what is called as subduction. So, subduction is where if I have a continent and an ocean floor next to each other, the ocean floor is pushed under the continent. Before it is pushed under the continent, it is forced to go downwards, and it sort of creates a kind of a valley in on the sea floor. And we have a whole lot of these valleys right across the world, right? When we do oceanography, we'll do that in a bit of a detail, right? And these valleys are called trenches. I think you may have heard of the Mariana Trench. So Mariana Trench off the coast of Philippines. It has the deepest part of the ocean there, about 12 kilometers. You can take the whole of Mount Everest and put it there and still it will not fill up. Still you'll have 4 kilometers left of material left, right? So a trench here is basically created when two continents are moving towards each other, right? Now, we also have a fifth evidence, and that fifth evidence is linked to the sea floor spreading. It comes from geologists, or rather geophysicists, who have studied the properties of various ancient rocks. And they have discovered that especially old rocks, which are igneous rocks, have certain magnetic properties. Okay, and the study of that is called as paleomagnetism. So paleo means in the past, magnetism is a property of physics, right? You know what magnetism is, right? So here is where they got a boat, right, fitted with what is known as a magnetometer, and it can detect the magnetic properties of rocks. So, what is a major magnetic property of rock is that unlike poles will attract, right? Like poles will repel, right? So, they what they did here is the they towed the magnetometer. They gave a color code. Okay, green for north polarity, orange for south polarity. Okay, and then they discovered that the entire Atlantic Ocean is made up of alternate bands of north facing or north polarity or south polarity rocks. Now, what do you mean by this? So, here it means that we know that on Earth, if I use a compass, my compass needle is going to face north. Now, why is my compass needle facing north? Because it is south polarized and it is attracted to the north. And my magnetic, we have what we call as a magnetic north pole, right? Now, when this was done, we now are saying that they are saying that the polarity of the earth, so we have north pole and south pole. So the magnetic pull of the earth, whereas in terms of north pole and south pole, has been shifting, right? So about every 77 years, I mean, looking at the number of magnetic reverse polarity we have had, the actual magnetic pole of the earth has shifted, jumped from north pole to south pole and south pole to north pole. At present, it is in the north pole. And there have been close to some 77 events during 150 million years where this has happened. Now, these are basaltic rocks which have large concentration of metallic minerals. So when they are flowing out, the minerals in this rock have been attracted to the Earth's magnetic pull or Earth's magnetic position. Okay, so some of them are like, if you can see the green means that they're all facing north. The orange means that they're all facing south. So this kind of arrangement in the rock itself shows that the North Pole and South Pole have been reversing over several. So green bits in the are pointing north, where you have north today, right? And the orange bits are too. So the metallic minerals have sort of become magnetic, and then when they get aligned in the rock, right, and then solidify to form from the magma to form rock, right, it will be remaining in that direction. So when I pass a magnetometer over it, this is what I get: bands, alternate bands of north facing and south facing rocks. And now they have been actually been able to say at what time. So we are now in any moment now, you may be thinking GPS and magnet, your compass, you're going to find your direction. Any moment now, they can be, the North Pole can jump to the South Pole, right? The reason for this is because the Earth is surrounded by another layer in the atmosphere beyond the exosphere, around the exosphere, known as the magnetosphere. And this has been created because of the sun's rays. So, for some reason, the entire thing just jumps, and now it is in the north, right? And then you can this thing it in the south. You know, you've done that the this thing of a bar magnet. If you keep a bar magnet and put pieces of iron on top and you pass this thing, you'll find that you will get a pattern, right? So that pattern shows the magnetism of that bar magnet, right, in the physics lab. So if you've not done physics, it's all right, but maybe at some point of time in school also they do these experiments. Okay, so this is how they have now proved, yes, the continents are being pulled apart or being pushed together, like India and Eurasia, Gondwana and Angara land were, and they are resulting in this kind of things, right? So that's your reason. Now, why is this happening? Is because the Earth's magnetic is doing what we call as a flip flop on an average of every 250,000 years, where north becomes south and south becomes north. This is the magnetic north. We have three norths. One is the true north. The true north is the position of the pole star. So if you keep walking north and the pole star is directly overhead, that is the true north, 90 degrees. The other is so that true north is actually from the axis, that's where exactly the axis is created. Then we have what we call as a grid north. The grid north is on any map. The top of the map is north, the south of the map, the world map, not all maps, but in a world map. And in any map of the world, except for probably Antarctica, you may have a problem. But other North America, you have north, south, you can identify north, south, that is a grid north. And then we have a magnetic north. Now the magnetic north has never been in the same place. So if I follow the magnetic north with my compass, I will probably reach Greenland, which is not near the North Pole at all, right? And this north has been changing over a few times. So, right? So the rocks of the sea floor are recording these reversals, right? And that's how we know that continental drifting has happened. Okay, I won't. Yeah. So here it's showing how we have normal magnetism, then your reverse magnetism, and back to normal, and how you have sea floor spreading. So sea floor spreading going up to the next evidence of paleomagnetism. Okay, and that is how it is happening. So the magnetism is varying depending on where the magnetic pole was in those several million years ago. Okay, right. So the result of this can be seen as alternative bands of rocks only by seen through a magnetometer, right? And if this was not happening, so together we can say seafloor spreading and paleogeomagnetism prove that the seafloor spreading has happened, and that this is the fourth piece of evidence that continental drift is a fact and not a theory. And for all practical purposes, we don't call it as continental drift because it is not the continent alone that is drifting, even the ocean is drifting. So we just call it as plate tectonics, and plates, right? So that's where you have. Now here is where you can see the trench. The trenches are all mainly found at the border between the continent and the ocean floor. So we have a trench right across North America, South America. We have trenches in the Pacific Ocean on the along Philippines, right? So that is actually the zone where two boundaries are meeting mainly. Okay, that's when you will find you have the trenches. Wherever they are, separating out also, you can call them as trenches, right? So that gives you a general idea of what plate tectonics is. Right. So we'll just move forward with, we have what we call as the final proof. Now, there is something called LGS, or the Laser Geodynamic Satellite, and it was actually called as LAGEOS, launched in 1976, right? And then later joined by another one, LAGEOS 2, in 1992. Now they orbit the Earth at an altitude of 3,700 miles, carrying the electronic equipment. Uh, carrying no, what is that now? Carrying electronic equipment. Okay, so laser beams are bouncing off from one point of the Earth, of the satellite, to a point in the ground, and now then they are able to measure the distance between 2 points with very great accuracy. Yes, so based on this, we have positioning satellites that are enabling satellites to use GPS devices to make accurate measurements of the positions on the Earth. And that is how the GPS has come onto our phone, right? And onto Google Earth. So we have actually got a satellite like that, right? Which is can actually be used. And then there are specific satellites for specific places also, right? So these show that the continents are still drifting at the rate of few centimeters a year. So what they saw on the ground in the early 1940s, you will find has now been confirmed. So you can imagine how accurate our map making skills were in those days, and also the what should I say the ability of those pilots to realize that how accurately they know that they're supposed to reach a particular point on the land when they are supposed to make some changes to their aircraft, and they find that that position has moved. So they have been like very attentive to all these details, which is why in the future now we are able to actually prove that all this is happening, right? Now, what is important here is that how could they possibly move? And that is the study of the structure of the earth, right? So we have these ocean currents. I've already told you about that. This sorry, convection currents, right? And that is what is uh, uh, has that's how we know that this is molten, and this is moving, and so on and so forth, right? So we know that, right? So these are the convection currents. So you can see what is happening here. There are different types of different convection currents of various sizes. So as you can see on the left and the middle one, as they come up, they are moving away from each other. So when they move away from each other, they are creating a crack in the ground. Magma will come out from those cracks and flow out, right? At the same time, the continents will be pushed, or the lands will move away from each other. If the convectional currents are moving towards each other, so at that point of time, you will find a mountain will be created in between, right? And that's what's happened with reference to the many parts of the world. So mountains have been pushed up because of some resistance between two continents. So the mountains that we have in between continents, one is your Himalayas, right? Two is the Alps. Alps also have been created because two continents have been sort of crushed together, right? And then we have on the African continent we have the Atlas Mountains. There also it has been pushed up, but then we've had a subsidence there of the Mediterranean Sea, and then you will find that the you can't see the continent there, right? So there are several small ranges that we have. Or Aravallis is one, Ural Mountains is another, okay? Then we have Old Fold Mountains, Appalachian Mountains, like that. We have a whole lot of mountain ranges within a continent that are because continents have moved together. Then, if you look at the map of the world, so here I'm not going to go through this again, right? I just wanted you to see that picture, right? So here, if you can see, we have three types of movements: divergent boundary, okay, in which case magma will come up and create new land. So the boundary, the plates are called as divergent, but the boundary is called as constructive. Okay, so we have a divergent boundary and it will create new land, and therefore we have a constructive margin. Similarly, we have convergent when they join up together. In this case, land will be lost. One piece of land will go underneath, that's called as subduction, and that is called as a destructive margin. Now, in some places of the world, only on two or three places in the world, you have plates moving parallel to each other. One is the Californian Nazca plate. Nazca plate and California, they are moving parallel along the North American coast, and they've attached themselves to North America. And that's where you have the San Andrean Fault. And that's a point where every time it slips, every time it moves, that's when we have a major earthquake. We also have one in the Indian region, which in the Bay of Bengal. It was discovered recently when there was an earthquake in that region of a slipping of the plate, but all the tsunami warnings went, but there was no tsunami. So they went and did a geological survey of the floor, ocean floor, and they found that the plate has moved parallel to each other. For a tsunami to form, the plate should either be pushed up or down. Okay, so the other Indonesian earthquake that created the tsunami was an upward movement of the Sunda Trench. So there is a trench in between the Pacific plate and the Indo-Australian plate, and the Pacific plate is moving towards Indo-Australian. So every time there is a push, it will sort of push the land up. The land will go up, the sea will go down, and therefore that will push up the sea to create the tsunami. So we have, that's the second one, and the third one is in New Zealand. Okay, so that's your constructive margin, destructive margin, and this is conservative margin. So nothing happens along it. Though you will have an earthquake, you will not have a tsunami. There will be no new feature created. In the constructive margin, new features will be created. Like the Japanese islands have all been created because of their constructive margin. Similarly, your Himalayas, right? Destructive margin is where land is lost underneath. You may have volcanic activity there. So volcanic magma may come, but land will be destroyed frequently. Okay, so that's with reference to this. And then you have diverging plates. So Rift Valley created, and that's how you have the Rift Valley here created in India also. So because of tension, a part of India has just sort of resisted the southern part because of the heavy lava that has flowed, and northern part has moved, and therefore we have cracks in the ground and the Rift Valley. The biggest Rift Valley is basically in Africa. In a few billion years, the map of Africa will change. If you see the map of Africa, you have many long lakes, and the lakes have been created because of water collecting in over rainfall over several thousand years and forming into these lakes. So one of the overflow of the lakes is the river Nile. Okay, and that is because the land is actually cracking up, and that's why we have so much of volcanic activity, old volcanic activity in this place. Recently there have been no this thing. We have the famous volcano on the equator, close to the equator. What is it called? Hmm. Do you know the name of the volcano on the equator? Anybody knows? It's called Kilimanjaro. Okay, we'll talk about that later. Then this is the convergent boundary. So here what happens is that the oceanic crust moves below the continental crust, or even in the ocean itself, right? So two oceanic crusts meet creating, and you will have the trench. And at the moment, you may also have an island in that region. Then here you have a continent plate colliding, and that's how you have the formation of mountain ranges. So here is where the South and North American plate are moving over the Pacific plate, and therefore they have pushed up the mountain ranges. The Rocky Mountains running north to south along the west coast of North America, and the Andes mountain running again north to south. It's a continuous range, right? Right from north to south. So that's only because the mountain continent has moved towards the Pacific plate, towards the west. They're drifting away towards the west. So in a few billion years, the size of the Pacific Ocean is going to reduce, and the Atlantic Ocean is going to increase. But that will take a very, very long time, right? Here is where you have volcanic mountains. So if you see the world mountains, I mean, you have what we call as the Pacific Ring of Fire. Wherever you have this continental drifting, you have a whole lot of active volcanoes in the region. And one of the best examples here is the Pacific Ocean. So, right around the Pacific Ocean, we have volcanoes, active volcanoes, and that's why it's called as the uh, Pacific Ring of Fire. So, this is just how, because what happens here is that the oceanic crust goes down. When it goes down, the dark color that you see is actually the asthenosphere, having a very high temperature. So the basalt melts, and when it melts, it becomes more charged up. If there is any crack or anything in the continental crust, it will come out through those cracks. They're known as fissures, and they will come out as volcanoes. So right across the Rocky Mountains and Andes in the eastern part of Pacific, and then you have on the western part of Pacific, you have, I'm looking at Pacific Ocean. So when you're looking at the ocean, east is North America, South America, west is your Eurasia, Asia mainly, sorry, Asia and Indonesia, okay, and a bit of Australia, which is mainly New Zealand. So here is where we have a whole lot of volcanic activity happening. And along with the volcanic activity, you will also have earthquakes. This is your India and Eurasia. You have a fold mount range created in within the continent due to the movement of two continental plates. So we have four types of movements that I've discovered: ocean to ocean, continent to continent, continent over ocean, okay, and one that is parallel to each other. So this is how we have the this right. So this is what I was talking about, the uh, transform movement. In the transform movement, on the picture on the left, you can see San Andrean Fault. That strip of land between which is Mexico on one side, it is California on the other. That whole thing has now attached itself to North America, and North America is sort of pushing downwards. This is pushing upwards. They're going parallel to each other, and that's the fault picture that you can see on the right. The land is actually cracked up, and what happens is that there are rivers that are flowing from the Rocky Mountains towards the sea, and the rivers suddenly get separated, right? So it falls into this, and then you can see the river valley is separated from each other. Okay, so that's your transform fault boundary, which is most like the most popular one. Okay, and here you have the North American and Pacific plates moving parallel to each other. So it's not everything everywhere moving in the same. It's become more and more what we call as complex. Okay, right. So I think this has been a little so this thing. So what do you need to know as for prelims? Now in prelims, they could ask you questions based on what are the types of movements you have and what are the boundaries that are created or margins created because of that. So if it is converging, C for converging, then it is D for destruction. If it is D for diverging, then it is C for constructive. Got it? So CD, DC. That's one way you can remember it. Then if it is parallel, P for parallel, then T is transform. So transform boundary, PT, right? And the overall term we use is conservative. Conservative means no change. So PTC. Okay, so these are way in which you can remember that. And what will you have at each of these boundaries? You will have volcanoes created, you will have earthquake. Definitely when the land moves, you definitely will have earthquake. But many parts we also have volcanoes. So that's a major effect that you have. If it happens in the sea, you will have a tsunami. If it happens on the land, you just have destruction on the land, you will not have anything. Okay, right? So that's you need to remember. But in your GS general studies paper, you have you may have to describe for 5 marks of what is happening. So that's why I've just given you a little more information, and it's good to see the whole information so that you understand it better, right? So we move on to the last topic, which is landform. This is a very simple one. I've chosen it to sort of make you feel a little more like that. So we have three types of landforms: first order, second order, and third order. Now, I've already used other words for this when I was teaching India. First order is what we call as macro, second order is meso, and third order is micro. Okay, so looking at the map of the world, what happened? So first order landforms. Okay, so look at the map of the world. All the continents are the first order. We have different colors here. So all the continents which has specific features about them, that's why they are called continents. So Asia is that color, Europe, Africa, North America, South America, and Antarctica. And we don't, it's not really Australia. I wasn't able to see a map, get a map. It is actually Australasia, also called as Oceania, right? So all these are first order landforms. And then we also have first order landforms in the basin, in the ocean. So the Atlantic Ocean, the floor of the ocean, the entire floor is called first order. Entire floor of Indian Ocean, Southern Ocean, Arctic Ocean, they are all called as first order land. So continents and ocean floors or ocean basins are the first order land. And that is a political map, right? A physical feature map will give you the second order of landforms. So here, the real picture, when you take off the surface of the water, you can see the floor of the ocean, and that is the second order of your landforms. So what is this on the continents? Let us look at what are the second order. One is mountains. So where do we have mountains? We have Rockies, we have the Andes, and we have the Himalayas, right? Then we have plateaus. We also have this thing. So plateau is the whole of Africa is a plateau. Isn't that a good thing? The whole of Africa has a plateau. It has mountains only in the north. That is the Atlas Mountain, which is a fold mountain. And the rest of it, what it has in the, there's a dark brown, are not really mountains. They are higher plateaus. Okay, and they have been broken down by a rift valley because of faulting, and so they have, over the years, those areas have become mountainous. So there are mountains that are created due to another feature which is called as erosion. So weathering and erosion will shape the mountain because of rain, and also sometimes because of man's activities. Then we have the Deccan Plateau, right? And then, of course, Brazilian Plateau, Australian Plateau, West Australia also is a plateau. Interior Asia, the whole region is made up of both mountains and plateaus. Okay, and that's the Brazilian Plateau. Then we have plains. The plains are all the ones that are shown in green. So that's the great European plain, narrow in the north in Europe, and as it goes in, it just spreads out, and that is almost at sea level. Okay, then we have the Siberian plain. That's a Siberian plain or the Russian plain, the Siberian plain. Amazon basin, we call it a basin, but it is a huge flat plain, which is why the rivers are able to flow in that region. So wherever you see green, so we use a color code for this. Brown for mountains, right? Yellow for plateaus, and green for the plains. So if you have a darker yellow, it means that plateau is higher. If you have a purple color, it's the highest. Okay, so you can see South America, you have very high mountains. Himalayan region, the entire region is extremely high, right? So that's your thing. Now we are zooming into the mountain. When we zoom into the mountain, now we are looking at the third order. What do we have here? We have valley and we have peaks, and we can have waterfalls also here. So that's a micro features within a mountainous region. Similarly, if you look at a plateau, can you see the top of the plateau is flat, but you can see that you can see that it has a dip, this thing. You may have residual hills and all kinds of other things on the plateau, but normally it is a flat, and it is slightly it higher, higher than 300 meters. It is known, and flat, it is known as a plateau, right? You can have waterfalls in this region. You can have what we call as residual mountains. For example, this mountain place that you have near Bangalore, where many people go for a trip. Sorry, at the end of class, I think. Yeah, so that place is actually a hill. You have lots of hills. If you just look out of the window when you're traveling, you will see that the entire plateau region, you have these hills, completely broken down rocks and so on and so forth, right? And all those are residual hills. They may be found on plateau. So that's the original plateau that you can see. And because of rain and other things, you'll find gradually it has come down and become land. And finally, you have the plain. So we already spoke about the plains yesterday, and we saw how flat they are. There are no up and down. You have, of course, rolling plains, which is slightly up and down, but all less than 300 meters in height. Okay, and they will have minor features. So, second order landform is basically the shape of the land. So, if it is conical, we call it mountains. If it is flat, it could be either mountains or plains, right? So mountains, 900 meters above sea level and conical, then we call them mountains. Plateaus are, it's very important to remember that plateaus, not only are they very flat, but they are very extensive. Okay, they cover a very large area. Only then you can call it as a plateau. And then plains also. Plains can be small or big because they are just flat areas less than 300 meters above sea level. Okay. And finally, yeah, so this is what you see in the plains. Yeah, I showed you these pictures yesterday. Yeah, and delta. And the first one, there is an alluvial fan. It's from the uh, Zarabad River in Pakistan. So all the material brought down. There it is fine material because it is flowing through the desert, and they bring down the material. Similarly, we have landforms in the ocean. In the ocean, it is mainly second order landform. You have a ridge, you have a continental shelf, slope, volcanic arcs, abyssal plain, which will be do later in another class. Okay, and that's the edge of the sea, continental shelf that we have in off the coast of America, right? And then third order really features mountains. You'll find valleys, peaks, waterfalls. Plateau will have waterfalls, residual hills. We'll also have river valleys. Plains will have alluvial fans, floodplains, bluffs, meanders, oxbow lakes, and deltas. So this information you actually need because they may give you what you call as match the following, and you should be able to identify which are the right ones, matched correctly or not, right? So you will be familiar with valley, peaks, waterfall. Interlocking spur, you may not be. Plateaus, residual hills, I just briefly told you. Alluvial fans, I've not done that in detail, but floodplains we talked about. Bluff is just that uh, side of a meander, which I'll talk about later. So I will do a short class on the features created, especially by rivers, since we have more of rivers in India. The features created by the rivers and what are the different names of those features. So I'll repeat this in another class. Okay. So I hope. So I guess there are not many doubts. If there are any questions. Any questions? Can you hear me?